Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Beauty Ripple, how Gen Z raised Gen Alpha to be beauty fanatics, redefining influence. So this is going to be our subject matter for the next 45 minutes. My name is Marina. I'm an expert in influencer marketing where that meets digital beauty culture. As Alexandra said, I am Vice President of Beauty and Wellness at Kyra. We're an AI-powered influencer marketing agency, but I also am a content creator. So some areas of the internet might refer to me as a double agent because we work with brands from like strategic level. I work with brands as a creator myself. So quite a unique lens that kind of helps with all of these sort of conversations. So we've been in the space as an agency for 8 years. We've got 6 years of historical data. From a content output perspective, and in the way of seeing how brands are inserting themselves into this marketing opportunity, advertising opportunity, we work on about 400 pieces of content, creator-led content every month. And here's what we're seeing. So this is what we're seeing from lots of data, working with brands and partners, working with creators day to day, and then what I'm sort of seeing as a whole. So when Gen Z arrived, they changed everything. So before 2020, we used to talk about this audience as just young people. And then 2020 hit, the pandemic hit, and suddenly everyone was talking about Gen Z. They are now making up 40% of global consumer spend. So they are a hugely powerful, hugely vocal audience. But what's interesting, and particularly when we apply the lens of beauty, is it's Gen Alpha now that people are eager to anticipate and trend forecast around. But what's really important is how we contextualize this audience in regards to the world that they're growing up in, the platforms that they're spending a lot of time in, and importantly, who is influencing them and how is that influence then transpiring from a behavioral standpoint. Start with a couple of myths. So myth one is Gen Alpha isn't old enough to care about beauty. But the reality is if Gen Z was the first digitally native audience, the first audience that was born and they have no recollection of the world pre-internet, Gen Alpha is one step deeper than that. So they are so comfortable online. They're comfortable in their digital communities. They don't see a difference between a relationship that is real, like IRL relationship, and a digital relationship. So when it comes to beauty, which is a huge vertical for expression for them, we see that really coming through. Myth two is Gen Alpha's beauty habits are disconnected from the generation before them. Beauty has been around for as long as we have, centuries and centuries. Beauty has always been inherited. And it applies to Gen Z and Gen Alpha as much as it's applied to the pre-digital world, because they actually are the widest recipients of inheritance because they have so much from so many different corners of the world that they're eager to engage with. And the last myth is Gen Alpha won't influence the beauty market for years, when actually they're already influencing the beauty market. They're already prompting brands, creators, channels to make changes. And it's something that we're really seeing with brands and entities already speaking to Gen Z, because through them, they're finding this loyalty with Gen Alpha, who are the next generation of beauty consumers. So with that, we go into the beauty ripple and our subject matter of the day. So I think what's important is, before we jump straight into sort of like what we're talking about, we're going to go a little bit wider and look at the state of play from a social media kind of prospect perspective. Creators are the new media channels, and they thrive on socials, goes without saying, but they thrive on socials. In today's world, because of the power of this influence, and I'll use the word influencers and creators interchangeably, but because of the power of this influence, when we look at creators and their engagement rate via publisher, and a publisher is everything from Vogue to news channels out like traditional media. Creators are the new publishers, storytellers, and news outlets. And when we think about young audiences, when we think about Gen Z, when we think about Gen Alpha, they are getting not only their beauty recommendations, they're getting their current affairs from social media and influencers and content creators. And this influence is huge. I think we still, there are parts of the world that still talk about influencers or influencer marketing is a small industry. This is currently a $485 billion industry globally, and that is set to grow to $525 billion across the next 6 years, a 21% rate of growth. So absolutely huge. And just to contextualize that, because those are obviously really big numbers, and other numbers will help that number be clearer. So if we look at things like TV, if we look at things like video games, if we look at things like music, the creator economy is so much bigger than all of these verticals. And actually, it's much more comparable to verticals like luxury fashion and verticals like sport. So huge and growing. And side note, we're only at the start of this. Actually, we're going to get much deeper into it as an industry, but an interesting sort of starting point. Where social media is harnessed, I should say, where the real crux of this is harnessed is very much TikTok. And the reason that we say TikTok is because beauty culture and TikTok go hand in hand from the point of view of what is discovered, what goes viral, even though that's a word that I deign to use, but all of that discovery, huge on TikTok. So if we think about some of the big traditional titles, whether it's Fast Company, whether it's the Washington Post, whether it's the New York Times, everyone is talking about TikTok, not just as a social platform, but as a force and a marketing engine and all the rest of it. So what's interesting from a time spent perspective is, and this is average time spent from 2023, is TikTok is where audiences are spending the most time. And this is extraordinary. If you think about the difference of the length of content, YouTube is there for mid to long form content. TikTok is shorter, more snackable. So having such a disparity in watch time is actually pretty exceptional. And when we look more widely, and this is where I think it gets quite interesting, is TikTok is outpacing not just YouTube, but even Netflix. So actually what we're looking at here, 35% of users say they spend less time watching TV since they started on TikTok. And it's either this thing that when they used to casually watch, they've stopped casually watching TV, or it's this second screen behavior, which is sort of like they're half watching something and then they're on their phone, on social media doing something else, which definitely applies to me. I guess a big catalyst to this change, goes without saying, is young audiences and the way that they behave on these platforms. So because of how social media has democratized creating content, people can find content creators, influencers that they really love. For that reason, they're spending more time on these platforms, less time in traditional media spaces, and growing this sort of new influence. So young audiences in general, of course, they're spending a lot of time online. And of course, there's different areas of pop culture that are applicable to them. But you cannot underestimate the power of beauty content when it comes to young audiences. I think there's a myriad of reasons for this. I think a couple of them are where we currently are in the world in terms of our stance on visibility, inclusivity, equity. I think beauty is a very powerful vehicle for that. I think we are also in a very interesting time kind of economically. Beauty is hugely buoyant, fashion less so. Music, TV, film, less so. So I think for lots of reasons, we've created more widely outside of beauty content, the sort of the conditions for it to thrive. But I think what's important is starting kind of, so if we've gone from here for like social media platforms, I think we come in a little bit and we start thinking about the evolution of beauty influence and where it started. And really that started on YouTube. YouTube was the first place that sort of relationship between audience, content creator, we used to call them bloggers, content creator really started. So this personality content, it was fronted by the big beauty bloggers of the noughties. These were like the first guards of the influence sort of gate, if you like. It was mid-form in length. It was format focused. It was audience centric. So it would be very much like these sort of mid-form pieces of content that were focused on a certain thing, whether it was like a vlog whether it was a spend the day with me, it was a very sort of set out piece of content. It harnessed this appointment. We call this an appointment to view cadence. So it was, and interestingly, that came from TV. So it would be, every Tuesday, a piece of content came out. Every Thursday, a piece of content came out. But it was conditioning the audience to expect to see new content, which was what all started on YouTube. So we kind of started this on YouTube. We then hit critical mass when Instagram came out. And on Instagram, it kind of offered audiences of a little bit of a different take on creators or influencers that they wanted to follow. So this is where content thrived on Instagram if it looked and felt like a modern day magazine. So if it had that kind of aspiration, and that's what Instagram was really thriving on. It was a balance of aspiration and inspiration, highly polished, highly highlights, really, very much sort of, fueling that like FOMO kind of concept that began to sort of follow the growth of Instagram. But also importantly, super shareable and community focused. So people go to YouTube to have this appointment to view. People go to Instagram, and it was much more like you could share things would go viral, very different algorithm to what we're going to talk about next. But it was the beginnings of that. Whether it had something to do with the pandemic or not, who knows? But essentially, Gen Z got really sick of Instagram, and they got sick of being perfect and polished. They got sick of like this like not real sort of version of life being sort of published everywhere. And it triggered a demand for a very different type of content, which was born on TikTok. With this very digitally assertive generation wanted content that encouraged a different type of online behavior. So this was honest, open, authentic. It was behind the scenes. It wasn't just like, give me the perfect picture at the end. It was, how did you get there? What did you use? That's when we started seeing this and pioneering inclusivity, and it democratized influence. Importantly, the key difference algorithmically between Instagram and TikTok is there is a relationship between virality and following on Instagram. There is no relationship between virality and following on TikTok, which feeds a couple of things. I think it feeds the creation of content because content creators, they're like pulling a slot machine every time. They're like, am I going to go viral? I could go viral. I might have 10 followers. I might have 1 million. Like if the content's good, your opportunity to kind of hit critical mass is the same. And I think that appetite feeds brands and partners then investing in the platform, which creates this audience that can't leave, basically. So I think all of that together is part of why we got here. So in the last 4 years, what we started to see was a shift. So we started to see the kind of shift from YouTube to Instagram to TikTok. And it's now exploded into this new form of storytelling, which has become the conduit to influence. So we saw beauty content develop from that sort of more traditional sort of YouTube type to this get ready with me story time, or story time get ready with me if you spend a lot of time on TikTok. That's really blowing up at the moment. Unboxing, the new age vlog. Like the views on this content is like, it's pretty eye-watering. It's global and growing, by the hour even, we'd say. What this has created is a different relationship between the audience and the creator, the audience and the influencer. It's built on a foundation of honesty and familiarity. And that kind of honesty and familiarity it creates a different type of connection and a different kind of opportunity. We saw for the first time this generation of fans getting a peek behind the curtain of lives that were previously private. If you compare like the power of influencers and influence in their storytelling to what generations before would have experienced with a celebrity, where you'd get nothing from a celebrity unless they did an interview or you saw something on the red carpet. But outside of that, you had no access to their private lives or anything that followed. So this created the conditions we needed for the beauty ripple to take effect. So this is where our concept starts to land. So Gen Z are the epicenter of the beauty ripple. So if we think about a pebble dropping and then ripples going through that, Gen Z are our pebble, if you like. They're the first digitally native generation we've seen. with this fluency, what Gen Z started doing is they started influencing each other. So they influenced across. As they grew older and more confident, what we saw was Gen Z started influencing up and started affecting the generations older than them. So millennials, Gen X. I was on a panel with Alexandra on Monday and she was talking about how her 15-year-old is teaching her about makeup. And that is what's happening. Like Gen Z is teaching the generation above. And actually what we're seeing now with Gen Alpha spending more and more time online, and with Gen Z having the loudest voice, they're now influencing down. So they've influenced across, they've influenced up, they're now influencing down. And really what they're inspiring is this next generation of beauty fans. So let's talk about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and beauty content on social in the middle. So Gen Alpha are most influenced by Gen Z icons. And those are icons, whether these are icons who are actors, they're musicians, they're YouTubers, they're TikTokers, they're YouTubers turned entrepreneurs, they're people with huge followings. All of these influential people have taken on the behaviors of influencers and content creators to create that audience and that connection with young audiences. So when we think about these icons, their work on social media and their content on social media is as influential as what they're doing on the global stage. And they've attracted this legion of fans in every, basically connected to every corner of their lives outside of just what they're doing, and defining a new era of celebrity where we're really seeing the influence start to shift. And when we think about, even if we take the Get Ready With Me as one of our formats, all of our icons, huge, like some of the biggest faces in the world, are still using the sort of the influencers format of a Get Ready With Me, because the language that Gen Z and Gen Alpha speak, beauty is such a big part of that. It's this sort of balance between, it's sort of like being on FaceTime with your best friend. Oh, like I might not be able to afford Zendaya's Bulgari dress, but maybe I can like wear the same eyeliner. It's this kind of balance that we're really striking that is so sticky, so addicting to this audience. And Hailey Bieber is someone who speaks this language very, very well. So Hailey Bieber is one of the most influential faces on the planet, but where we've really seen her kind of catapult is her use of social media. So she's kind of this like Nepo baby, it girl, blew up on socials and then really harnessed her influence in a really interesting way, which we'll go through. Whether it's her channels, so huge, absolutely huge, not just like on Instagram, on TikTok, on all of the above. And she does a really great job at balancing that bridge with her young audiences. When it comes to beauty, Hailey Bieber's influence is extraordinary, actually. From makeup, skincare, nails. There was a point, I think 18 months ago, where it felt like every single trend was coming from Hailey Bieber, whether it was cherry cola lips, it was sugar bum fairy makeup, it was glazed donut nails. It's like you could not get away from what this woman was doing. And she did a really great job of sort of starting this trend and then have it almost like die out and then starting another one. So super interesting. And again, like using the same formats, the same language that were born on socials that influencers are using, have been using for years. But what's especially interesting about Hailey Bieber is in 2022, so only 2 years ago, she launched Rhode Beauty, which is her beauty line. So she launched it with 4 products, which is very Glossier of her, as like the generation before. 4 products. And the aesthetic of her brand basically feeds into this clean girl aesthetic, which is just the aesthetic we cannot get away from on socials, on TikTok, all the rest of it. She's basically created a brand to allow people to look just like her, which is genius. So what we saw is she had this ability to really create trend. She had this ability to really grasp people's attention. And what she did is she mixed that social media virality with influencer hype. So she started building this kind of community of very influential people who were still influenced by her. And then she put product in the middle of it, which is genius. So the Rhode Peptide, hugely, hugely popular product of hers. It's like a hybrid between skincare and makeup, performs well, still looks beautiful, all the things absolutely slap bang in the middle of what this audience really loves and what they shop for. She then, hopefully this is not new to anyone, but she created this phone cover case, and that image on the far left is how she sort of like hard launched it to the world. This went crazy. And I think what was really interesting there is, again, this going back to that language, like speaking that language of like, here's the aesthetic, here's the product, here's how you then like land it on socials. I think, you know, there's no one that does it like Hailey Bieber does. And Rhode is expected to generate 100 million in revenue this year, which is crazy because it's literally not even 2 years old. So, you know, I think Rhode does it really well. What we can't sort of get mixed up is Hailey Bieber was sort of like the spark in her brand. And then the rest of it was how it lived and breathed on social media through influencers, through their communities, and how they really, I guess, were developing that flame with her. So with that, going on to sort of how we can learn from all of that, because, you know, if you're from a beauty brand, you might be like, yay for Hailey Bieber, but I don't have one of the most famous faces in the world. So what can I do from that? There are definitely brands who understand and get this kind of new influence. 50% of Gen Alpha wants to buy products used by online creators and influencers they follow. So we do a report every year called the Gen Z State of Beauty Report. That is 10% higher than Gen Z. And if we think about how young these consumers are, so Gen Alpha officially is 13 to 17. If you're 13 to 17 and one of every two of that consumer basically following people online and like wanting to buy their beauty products, that is pretty outstanding. So this kind of concept of influence plays a really integral role in their product discovery and their purchase decisions. And we know from the same State of Beauty report that what people come to TikTok for is they come to TikTok for product discovery and for trend. That's the number one thing they kind of go to it for out of all the platforms. Some more traditional brands, I say traditional because traditional in some ways, they've targeted both generations in a really successful way. So Glossier does it really well because they kind of utilize that makeup skincare hybrid, which we know from their kind of not just their values, but their aesthetics and what they're looking for really resonates with this audience. Brands like Drunk Elephant, you know, if anyone has been sort of reading over the last, I'd say like 4 months about the Sephora kids and, you know, they're like taking over Sephora, all the things. Drunk Elephant is often a brand that kind of sits in the middle of that because of its aesthetic and because of how, you know, the products look and how appealing they are to a young audience. Sol de Janeiro is also a really interesting brand. Obviously, you know, fragrance is huge kind of in this part of the world, but in other parts of the world, young people are just kind of beginning to wardrobe fragrances, buy more than one, use different ones in kind of different kind of areas of their life. So again, we're sort of seeing something different there. I think it's always an interesting example because Dior were really the beneficiaries of one of the very first instances of like true virality on TikTok with the lip oil. You start building with a lip oil and then suddenly your concealer, your foundation, your lip stain, everything sits well on top of that. But what all of these brands have in common is that they are all working with highly relevant influencers to tell their brand story. That's what they all have, whether it's Rhode or whether it's the fall before, that's what they all have in common. So if we're crossing over with this audience, here are 4 things to keep in mind if you're a beauty brand. So the first thing is know where to reach them. So we've gone through some of it here, but know the platforms that they're spending their valuable time on and meet them there. This audience isn't watching TV and they're not reading magazines. That's not where their next purchase is coming from. They're living on socials and they're consuming content from people that they either like or they're entertained by, but they're inspired by and influenced by. So reaching them means speaking their language in the places that they're already dwelling. Show up authentically. So Gen Z has been led by Gen Z in this respect. So they're not a generation to be unauthentic with because they are so comfortable on socials. They will just call you out on anything. So know what you stand for before you stand in front of them. That's really crucial. And I think Also, if you're kind of looking to engage with this audience, I think it's important to ask yourself, are you ready to engage with them? Because they've been raised with authenticity. They're looking for brands with the same values as them. Inclusivity, sustainability, vegan products, ethically sourced, all of those things are not like nice to haves for them. They expect that from the brands that they shop with. They're not progressive. They're just housekeeping. You know, if you are a brand who is supporting something in the world that they don't believe in, they will boycott you. All of those things you need to consider if you're ready for when you're actively trying to engage with this audience. Because otherwise they will just tell you, basically, in your comments. So that brings us to my third point on listen to the comment section. So one of the things, you know, back when YouTube was a bigger part of our business, we called it the feedback loop, which is essentially in your comment section, your audience will tell you everything. So, and there's one thing Gen Alpha will do is they will tell you if they think something or if they want to see something from you. So the comment section, the present and the future of your business, don't underestimate that. So when it comes to social, like, and just to contextualize my first point, the opportunity you have when you're listening to your audience from a future-proofing perspective is so vast. Because if you post something and someone has a question about packaging, or if you post something and they say, can you make it fragrance-free? You post something and they're like, oh, this doesn't work for my hair type, or this shade isn't correct for me. All of those things will help guide your business in the right direction. And the one thing about this audience is they will tell you that. So that's why your social media teams are a crucial part of your marketing engine, because although there's other parts of your business that are, of course, necessary and important, it's only social media and that ability to, I guess, hook into that virality and hook into that flywheel that could be the difference overnight, which is always what we're looking for. Community is everything, and how you manage that community is integral. So community management used to be just kind of like a thing for customer service. Absolutely not. Community management is what will drive your community and drive your business. And then once it works, scale it, because that's what success will mean. So once you get into like your brand values being there, product and messaging feeling good, you're working with the right influencers, you're listening to them and iterating, all of that at scale will mean that you'll keep staying ahead of what this audience is looking for you. So just to finish off before we get to questions. So Gen Z has become the most influential generation, shaping trends and shifting perspectives in every direction, impacting millennials and defining Gen Alpha's worldview through the power of social media and influencer culture. Gen Alpha are the future, poised to reshape the world through their unique lens, with beauty as a powerful vehicle for self-expression and change. Pay attention to the ripples, watch for the early signs and insights in the space where they engage and connect. Brilliant. Thank you all for your time and attention. So I would love to take questions with the time we have left over. If anyone's got something itching they'd like to ask.
Thank you so much for this really amazing
My pleasure.
presentation. Much appreciated. And talking by the Generation Z and the Alpha and their characteristics now, how they are impacting the trend, especially in the e-commerce platform. What do you think are the most challenging characteristics for Generation Alpha that needs to be considered when designing the e-commerce strategy? And how can we keep driving the attention of this type of generation, knowing them, this generation, they don't have patience to, and usually they are in rush. They want to move fast. So to keep these beats moving, what do you think we should reconsider on the e-commerce strategy? Yes, in your experience.
Thank you. Fantastic question. So I think it's a couple of things. So every year we believe that everyone outside of the East will fall into social commerce. Every year we're like, this is the year. Like TikTok Shop, like it's going to be this year. Every year we've fallen behind slightly, but I do feel like social shopping, social commerce is something that is actually developing in a really encouraging direction. So I would say, especially if we're looking at a 13 to 17-year-old now, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, those shoppers will be shopping largely through social media rather than going to like a brand website, a retailer website. I think essentially from a shopping perspective, I would expect their behavior to split into two. Either they go to Sephora on a day out with their friends and they want to shop their brands in one place and one retailer, or they want to see a piece of content, click through, and like 2 clicks and they have whatever it is they've discovered that's moved them. So I would say a really considered part of your e-commerce strategy is seeing where that interlinks with social and platforms like TikTok, Instagram, maybe Roblox even. Definitely how you make that as seamless and one touch as possible, I'd say. Great question.
Hi, Ayla.
Hi, Isla.
I'm from Jabodor, a fragrance house.
Great.
And I was wondering, because we do see big differences between Gen Z and millennials.
Mm-hmm.
Do you already see very big differences between Gen Alpha and Gen Z? And if yes, what would be the main difference?
Yeah, I'm going to be totally honest with you. If anyone can confidently say that they can tell you the difference between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're not being honest. Gen Alpha are far too young. Firstly, they're under 18, so we can't track them. So from a data perspective, we don't know what their behavior is doing. I think we anecdotally, as leaders, we have like Gen Alphas in our life. So people will talk about their like cousin or son or daughter, what have you, and then take that as like a microcosm for how the whole consumer base behaves, which is obviously correct. I would say what we're in a position at this point to do in terms of the difference between Gen Z and Gen Alpha is anticipate, because until they're at they're 13. We shouldn't be trying to market to them, to be really honest with you. We should leave them be and let them grow. I think when all this kids are taking over Sephora thing happened, I think we were being really harsh to Gen Alpha, because all they are is like young kids that are like playing with makeup and skincare, because that's what I did. Maybe I did that in like my mum's bathroom when no one could watch me. But I think it's the same behavior we've seen time and time again. I don't think Gen Alpha are like this alien generation that don't feel anything like us and aren't moved in the same way. I think that they maybe have elements that are accentuated. Like I think in the way that maybe a millennial like wouldn't leave a review or wouldn't comment something, or would just kind of, like they will be much more comfortable to do that and express themselves in the digital forum. But outside of that, I think we just need to watch really closely and move quickly when we see things coming through. But I would say at this point, I don't anticipate like a huge chasm between the two generations. I think really the difference between Gen Z and millennials is massive. But Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I would expect them to grow up, like maybe not twins, but sisters. Pleasure. We probably have time for one more question, should someone feel.
My name is Satya Prabhu from India.
Hello.
Thank you. I would like to understand, like today we wanted to launch a new product in a country, like here in GCC. How do we find an influencer from a foreign land coming to India and finding them? And how do we find a contract with them? And everybody's asking huge money.
Yeah.
I don't know, how do we understand the right money, what we can pay for those people?
Yeah.
And everybody's presenting that they have huge followers. Actually, there seems to be very less result coming out of their posts. How do we focus on that? If you can help us.
Yeah.
And further help us.
That is
Thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you for the question. That is $1 million question. If you are launching a product, or you're going into a new market, or just generally if you're trying to pick the right influencers to work with, it's not the easiest, I appreciate. So we do that day to day at Kyra. Like this is what I do as a day job for years for beauty brands all the time. This is my advice. If you either find a specialist partner, an agency that can help you, who's done this, that's one thing. If you are working independently and you want to figure it out in-house, data is your friend. So you need to look at the numbers, not following, but the numbers. Look at things like a couple of things that I really love. I love median views. So like views they're getting on average, ensuring that's consistent. Posting cadence, how often are creators posting? And then when they are posting, it's not just their engagement rate being high, it's what are people talking about. So if they're posting about a lipstick, are people talking about the lipstick, or are they talking about hair, or like are they talking about the thing that you're posting about? So I think it's having the data in the right place, ensuring that the community is really there, and then doing at scale. In terms of what to pay them, honestly, no one knows. Not creators, not brands, not agents. There is no regulation in this industry, which is crazy because we're going to reach 535 billion by 2030 and no one knows how to price themselves correctly. It's actually madness, but it does mean that you can have a conversation. And I would say, again, based on how much you want to work with them, expected ROI, like your return on that money, you kind of have to figure it out. But this is also why if you find an agency, if you're asking a creator, like, what are your average views, what's your engagement, and they're not coming back to you, do not work with that creator.
Many of them are like this. They come and pitch us that they wanted to do an agency work with us. They're ready to promote a product. I've discussed with many people. After asking them the results, what they can offer, and the kind of past records, they're not coming back to us. And even if we are ready to pay them, also they're not coming back to us. And one more thing, there is a promotion in the Facebook and the Instagram, boost post and then meta ads. How much does it work? Which medium is actually really giving a good business to us? Because imagine that we are coming up with a new product. We wanted to bring it to the viewers of the customers who can really buy the product from us. How can we take it up? Like, is it worth of spending so much of money on Instagram ads, on Facebook ads, or YouTube ads, or is there any other medium other than these three? Because in India, TikTok is banned.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah.
So I would say,
which is the other medium? Like, is this everything with these three platforms? Don't we have anything else?
No. I mean, you absolutely. The thing is, and
Thank you.
TikTok was banned in India 4 years ago, and all that happened is everyone who was on TikTok went on Instagram and started watching Reels. Even though the platforms maybe not there, the behavior is still very similar from a growth perspective. So I would say, my advice always for a digital strategy is never like spend everywhere very small, like do some test budgets everywhere. Again, look at your results, look at your analytics, see how things are performing. If it's performing well, up the spend. If it's not, don't spend anymore. Because until you know who your audience is and how your product is going to react in the space, you might think your strongest platform is Instagram, and actually like Meta is the one that's driving a lot of growth for you for that product. But that's something that you'll need to discover, I'd say, without knowing more about your product and your brand. I'm afraid that's all I can advise. Yeah, fair. Lovely. Yeah. Thank you all so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Yelena.